Good day, everyone, and welcome to my channel. Today, we are going to be discussing constructors in C Sharp. Now, this is going to be an in-depth guide to help you understand constructors in C Sharp. Now, we are going to be looking at a few examples in the C Sharp documentation, so let's get started. Now, what is a constructor? A constructor is a method whose name is the same as the name of its type. So, as you can see, we have a person class, and we have this method that shares a name with its type, the person class. So, that is a constructor. When a class or struct is instantiated, its constructor is called. So what they are saying is when we create a new instance, the constructor is the one being called. And constructors have the same name as the class or struct, and they usually initialize the data members of the new object. As you can see, we have a taxi class, and in the taxi class, we have the taxi constructor or the constructor. Now, in our taxi class, we have a field called isInitialized. And when we create our taxi constructor, we set the value of the isInitialized field to true. When we create a new instance of the taxi class, the constructor is called and the field is initialized to true. So when we write this to the console, we are going to get a true value. So it's going to write true. Just to reiterate, we have a taxi class, and in the taxi class, we have the isInitialized field. So this field has not been assigned a value yet. And we are saying when the taxi constructor is called upon, we want the value of this field to be set to true because it's a boolean, right? So that's what's happening in the main method. When we create a new instance of the taxi class, the taxi constructor is called, and when it's called, the value of is initialized is set to true. Okay, guys, hope you understood that. Okay, guys, let's move on. Now, they are saying a constructor that takes no parameters is called a parameterless constructor. Parameterless constructors are invoked whenever an object is instantiated by using the new operator and no arguments are provided to new. As you can see, the constructor in the taxi class takes no parameters. So that makes this constructor a parameterless constructor because it does not take any parameters. Now, that's the first constructor we have looked at, and we are going to look at another constructor called an instance constructor. Now, they are saying you declare an instance constructor to specify the code that is executed when you create a new instance of a type with the new expression. All right, let's look at the next example. They are saying you can declare several instance constructors in one type. Okay, we have the chords class, chords constructor, another chords constructor. So these are both chords constructors. Why? Because they share a name with the class type, right? They are methods that share a name with their type. And this is a parameterless constructor. As you can see, it doesn't take any parameters. And this right here is the instance constructor. It takes two parameters, an integer x and an integer y. These are our properties. So we have public int x with getSet and public int y with getSet as well. Now, to explain what's going on here, I first want to start with the instance constructor. Now, before I explain what's happening in the second constructor, let me explain these two instances. Okay, so we have the first instance P1 and the second instance P2. The first instance P1 belongs to the first constructor. Why? Because it doesn't take any parameters. And the second instance P2 belongs to the second constructor because it takes two parameters. So that's the difference. I just kind of want to get that out of the way. Now let me explain what's happening in the second constructor. When the second constructor is called, so right here, when we create the instance, the second constructor is called. So when the second constructor is called, we assign it two values. We assign it a 5 and a 3. And when this constructor is called, it's going to initialize these two properties with the values that were passed in this constructor. So that's what's happening when this constructor is called. It initializes these two properties, the x and y properties, with the values that get passed here. That's what's happening, right? And if you're wondering about the public override string to string method, it just helps us to define how our x and y properties are going to look when we print them to the console. As you can see, the output codes 2 at 5 3. We were just defining the structure that the x and y properties are going to take when printed to the console. Now on to the first constructor. Now you might be asking yourself, well, why do we need two constructors in this example? The first constructor assigns default values to the x and y parameters in the instance constructor. This is the same example we've been looking at. Now, if we call the second constructor, let's say we don't provide any values, so there's no 5, there's no 3, right? What happens is we are going to call the first constructor, as you can see, right? But what's happening when we call the first constructor? The first constructor assigns default values to the second constructor. So it assigns the x and y parameters default values of 0. So as you can see, this is a method call to the second constructor. I wanted you guys to see the highlight, this pop-up right here, so that you can see that in the chords class, we are calling the chords method and assigning it the chords method with these two parameters. So we say this 0 0, and that's how we are assigning these two parameters default values, right? So we could say 45 and 98, and this 45 and 98 are going to be the default parameters here. So if there's no value here, this constructor is going to call this constructor with the 45 and 98 here, and then this constructor is going to assign these properties the values that were passed here. I hope you're with me. So I'm just going to run this, and we get 45 and 98. Okay guys, I hope you understood that. So just to reiterate, the first constructor calls the second constructor with these parameters. So this 45 is going here and this 98 is going here when no values have been passed. So this is a method call to this constructor. And as you can see, when I highlight over the this keyword, it shows us like this is a method call, right? Now let's say, just for argument's sake, we had 100 here, and we'll say int z, and then as you can see, int x, y, z. So these are representing these parameters. So 45, 90, 100 represent the parameters in the instance constructor, not the properties. So that's why I wanted to come in Visual Studio and show you this. I wanted you to see these pop-ups in Visual Studio because they do a better job of visualizing or explain what's happening, right? Lastly, I would like us to take a look at this. Okay, so for parameterless constructors, if a class has no explicit instance constructors, C# provides a parameterless constructor that you can use to instantiate an instance of the class, as the following example shows. So we have a person class, and notice we didn't create a constructor, right? And they are saying if a class has no explicit instance constructors, C# provides a parameterless constructor for you. So that's just something I wanted to show you, so that you can know that when you create something like this, there is a constructor. Like there is a constructor, it's just being provided implicitly for you by C#. And that's why something like this works even without the constructor. So that's it for this video, guys. Thank you for watching and good day.